try to condense it down. So a few ways that we learn from people around us. One of them, I'm going to edit everything from here forward out anyway. So there's a few ways that we can think about it. One of the ways that we learn is we call it reciprocity. There's a C. There's a C or an S. Reciprocity. And that means that there's someone, you have like a close friend, and you guys maybe like, I don't know if any of you have a friend like this where you're funny by you're not really funny by yourself, but with your friend you're hilarious, and then they're hilarious, and like you guys play off of each other back and forth, and then you're almost like pushing each other to the line to see how far you can go before someone says something that's over the line. And then when you do, it's even funnier. This is one of the ways that we can learn from people, that we interact in society. There's reciprocity that's there. We're kind of giving and we're taking. Another way of thinking about it is, what would you say? How would you say it? Almost osmosis. And by osmosis, what I mean is that it's happening to you almost unconsciously. We don't even realize that we're learning. So if I were to, talking yesterday, a friend of mine has a daughter, and her daughter does, my friend does this thing where she does like that fake, like catch yourself laughing scoff thing, where like she'll tell a story, like, somebody will say something about, their hair, and she'll do that thing where she'll get, like she caught myself laughing. And she doesn't even realize that she does it because her daughter was doing it. And I made a reference about how I could see her mannerisms in her daughter. And she's like, really? Like what? So I told her about that, the fake laugh scoffing. And she's like, I don't do that. I'm like, you do it. Like, I'm not exaggerating. She does it a lot. And then I commented to her because she knows that her daughter does it, but she didn't realize that she does it. And so then one time she was mentioning, she goes, after you mentioned it to me, I started to realize it now. Yeah, I do see it now. I do that a lot. So my guess is that her daughter probably doesn't even realize that she does it. And so my friend probably got it from somebody else. In other words, there was this unconscious learning thing that happened there. Now that's not just that. Of course, it's speech patterns, it's manners of dress, it's even thought processes. There's a lot that kind of goes on in this thing, right? And this is how most of the learning kind of happens with us. And then there's this other way, which is probably the most dastardly way, and we'll just call it conformity. And by conformity, what that is that's essentially people who will conform to social expectations. Not that conformity is a bad thing, necessarily. If you have an impulse that you want to murder people, but society expects you not to, so you jam your hands in your pockets, you kick the dirt, and you just conform, and you're like, fine, I won't kill anybody. That's a good thing, to conform in that way. But there are ways in which we also conform that we don't like to, and we feel like we shouldn't. This is happening, by the way, consciously. This is happening unconsciously, and this is happening kind of semi-consciously. We realize our friend and I are pushing each other back and forth. Here we're learning things without even realizing that we are. So I guess at the end of all of it, you add all of this stuff up, and you ask yourself, so which of this, how much of this is you? In other words, how much of all this social influence is you, and how much of you is really originating within yourself? And I think what you're going to find is that there's very, very, very little. Like if you think about, if you have kind of what are some of your original thoughts? And I would wager that if you told me what one of your original thoughts were, I could sit and talk with you for a little bit and ask you some questions. And if we're being honest in how we answer, I could find the genesis of that original thought somewhere in here, very likely. Not 100%, because of course there are original thoughts, there are original ideas. But people who have original thoughts and original ideas are incredibly powerful thinkers. This is why we know who they are, 2,000 years later. This is why I talk about the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche frequently, because he's such an incredibly powerful and original thinker. He's such an original thinker that most people, you won't even realize what an original thinker he is, because there's a world before Nietzsche, and then there's a world that happens after Nietzsche. And what happens after Nietzsche is now just common sense, because of what he wrote, not because Not because you think it originally, but because it comes from this guy whose thinking then influenced so many other people, and now that's just the way that the world looks, or certainly the way that the Western world looks. And those are the, even as I think now, like we'll talk with people, okay, for example, the idea that a lot of students will have, like, you know, if I walk over and take your backpack, you freak out. It's an invasion of my privacy. Where do you get that from? An invasion of your privacy. Where does that come from? We just take for granted that it's something. And it is something in this country, but if I ask you where does that come from, how many people can actually explain where the idea comes from? Because it's an idea that is absolutely unique to the United States. It's something that's absolutely unique to our Constitution. And yet now it's one of those things that people in the world will look at and go, well, yes, there's a right to privacy. Yes, there's a right to free speech. But those are only things that originate 250 years ago with a very select group of incredibly powerful and original thinkers. Of course, we're tearing down their statues now at the same time that we exercise the free speech rights. But that's, you know, I guess part of free speech. And so now there's a world that we've entered that we just kind of take for granted, the ideas that came before it. Those aren't things that are original to us. That's the water in which we swim. Those are the things it's the world that we live in that we just kind of take for granted that that's just the way that things are. But it's not the way that things have to be. But it is the way that things are. And so there's lots of things like that in your life, I would guarantee it. When I see students who dress in a certain way, and then I see them in the wild, as it were, outside of this classroom, and I see them with their friends, and I look and I go, wow, you all dress the same way. It's like, no, I don't. If I put you in a group, if I took somebody out of your peer group and plugged them in there, I could say one of these things is not like the other. Take it out. Just because you're not wearing the identical pants, you're wearing very similar style. You're wearing very similar things. That's this right here. It's a conformity. It's a conscious conformity. Because none of us pops out of the womb dressing like that. We do it because we fit in with a certain group. And even then, it's not even just like a general group of age. It's not even just a general group of school. It's not even a general group of community. It's very specific cliques within that small community. And so that's this. You know, in some cases, I do see this happen as well. So people like push each other in terms of what they wear. I'll leave it at that. And then, but then even the whole idea of wearing clothes at all comes from here. None of it comes from here, as much as we think it does. Now, there is somebody, somewhere, some city, somewhere in the world, who came up with this idea of a style, who then pushed it out to the public, who then do this, or this, or this. But very rarely does it ever originate here. I was thinking, no, I'll leave that. So, when he's saying the purification of the soul is simply to allow it to be alone, understand that when your ideas are going through this, so is this kind of like soul thing that we're talking about. So if I ask you, like, how do you develop your soul? Well, it's impossible to do. It's impossible to purify when there are people around. It's kind of like, how do you have pure ideas when you're being bombarded constantly with this external influence? You can't. You can't. I mean, it's one of the things about school that's interesting is that we push this idea of trying to force you to you know, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? What do you think about this? I don't know why anyone cares. If you haven't done thought work. It's like I was talking, I think it was in this class, about, I mean, we share almost any idea, almost any debate at all. Like if I ask you, what do you think about the death penalty? I don't know why we want you to write an essay about the death penalty. I wonder how many people in here have spent more than 45 seconds thinking about the death penalty. I imagine there's one or two of you, maybe three of you, but for the most part, we don't think about that stuff. So anything that, if I'm asking you, what do you think about the death penalty, it's probably, what I should just be asking you is, what have you read about the death penalty? Which is, of course, is going to be nearly nothing. What conversations have you had about the death penalty? Which, of course, is going to be nearly nothing. So given that we haven't read much about it, given that we haven't had any discussions about it, it seems like a weird thing for me then to ask you, what does your soul say about the death penalty? Because there's really going to be nothing, it's just kind of made up on the spot. It doesn't represent a true idea, a true thinking. You know? So what you have to do, therefore, if you want to be to purified is you have to separate yourself from it. You need to be separate from the influences. If you have a family that influences you very deeply, well, how do you get free of that? Well, you have to be away from your family in order to do that. Right now, like the 12th graders, a lot of them are, they get accepted to these universities, and they'll be like I'm thinking of one student right now who's accepted to a pretty prestigious university on the East Coast, and then she was also accepted to a Cal State school. How do I say this nicely? State schools are nice. Okay? Cal State LA, San Diego State, they're nice. Okay? They have nice campuses, they're nice places to be. I'm sure the professors there are very, very nice. But, having said that, the lowest ranked UC is still like 10, 15 places ahead of the highest ranked Cal State. And there are many other schools that are in between there. In terms of where we go to school, if you want to do something after school, where you go matters. Because who you meet is going to matter. You're not going to meet the top people in their field at San Luis Obispo, probably. But you're going to meet them at Amherst. You're not going to meet them at San Diego State, but you will meet them at Stanford. And if what you want to do after school is something really in those fields to apply some deep ideas, then yeah, because who you study under matters. Where you go matters. All that stuff really matters. But anyway, so a lot of my students are struggling with this thing right now, where they're accepted to universities that are far away, and then they're accepted to like San Diego State or San Marcos, which again, as I said, are a fine place. I'm not disparaging them. I'm just saying that they're not Amherst. And so I have these students who are struggling with, do I go to this one faraway place, or do I stay here? And of course, what's the struggle? What are their families saying? Stay here. You can save money because you can live at home while you're in school, and all of that. And then when you do that, you're missing something that's really important, which is the purification of the soul. Being able to get away from if you're going through college, the whole idea is you're supposed to grow. When you graduate from high school and you go out into the world, the point is you're supposed to grow. How can you grow if you keep your roots exactly where they have always been? You can't. How can you develop if you're just going to surround yourself by the exact same influences that you've always had? It's like when students ask me, they're going to community college, and they'll ask me, should I go to Grossmont? Should I go to Southwestern, or should I go to? And I'll stop them and go, yes. Well, so not Southwestern? No. Why not? Because most of the people that from here who go to college who don't go to a university end up at Southwestern, which means that you're going to, and there's nothing wrong with Southwestern, again, I teach there, but you're going to surround yourself with all of the same people that you went to high school with, which means you're going to have all the same influences. It's going to feel very much the same. And if you feel very much the same, then you're going to develop in exactly the same way. So it's better to go anywhere than to be surrounded by the same people, because that's how you develop, that's how you grow. I ask you, so let's say that you go through high school, you go into college, and your family convinces you to stay where you are, it guilts you, or maybe you get homesick or whatever. So now I guess my question is, what happens after you graduate from high school, from university? What if you have an opportunity to take a job in Paris? Or you can take a job in San Isidro. Which one are you going to take? Well, I can stay at home, I'm nearby, my family's here. Okay, but that's how people get planted in areas and don't develop, because we confine ourselves to the places where we've always been, because they're comfortable. But I'm promising you this, the things that you need to find about yourself are going to be found in the places that you least want to look. The things that you most need to find are going to be found in the places that you least want to look. And that's because the places, it's like the jobs that you want are going to be the most competitive, because everybody wants them. The places that you least want to look they're not comfortable. You've already explored the comfortable parts of life. And yet, and so we insist on staying in that donut of the comfortability of life. There's something else that's farther out there. All of the things that you seek in life are out there. Are there any heroic stories or any movies or books that you guys have read or watched where the hero stays at home? And the adventure is in their house? Of course not. Because we know that in order to have that adventurous life, you have to extend out and do something that's beyond where you presently are. Because if you always do what you've always done, you're never going to be anything other than what you presently are. And so, how do you purify that soul? Well, you have to separate yourself from the things that you've always been. That doesn't mean you can't go back afterwards. But I will warn you, you can't go back afterwards. But doesn't mean you can't go back afterwards, but you won't, because you'll have seen things differently. And you can't unsee, you can't unexperience the things of your life. And then when you go back, it's like, wow, you just don't fit in anymore. You don't belong. And that's something that will happen to many of you as you grow and you expand. You're going to realize that you don't belong where you used to be. And maybe you're going to find yourself in a place where it's hard to find where you fit in. But the truth of the matter is you probably never really fit in the first place. So at least now you're aware of it, and you can go find a place to go. Find a place where you fit in. So you have to allow it to be alone. And it's only pure when it keeps no company, because you're going to be constantly bombarded by these influences. And so it's a thing to consider. If you're going to stay where you are, then you're always going to be what you presently are. And intuitively, I think everyone in this room knows that you're not what you should be. And you're certainly not what you could be. You're certainly not what you could be. And I wonder how many of us, where if you guys had children, and they knew that the absolute truth about who you are right now, you would sit there and go, I'm proud that my child knows exactly who I am. And, better yet, I want my child to be what I am and to do what I'm doing right now. You know? A lot of you are going to have to lie a lot when you get older about the shit that you didn't do when you were younger. And I'm not saying it's just you guys, of course, it's a lot of people. Or you're going to be the worst parent in the world, and you're going to tell your children what you did. No, I'm telling you, I did do these things. I'm going to admit that I did do these things, but I don't want you to. Oh, good fucking luck with that. Because no one's rich enough to buy back their past, and no one is influential enough to not have those things held against them by their children. And many of you know exactly what I'm talking about. You find out something wrong with your parents, and you just dig right into it, and that's how you want to characterize them, because it justifies how you live. Well, I found out that my mom ditched school one time when she was in high school. And so therefore, that means that I can be, I can have 58 truancies. Well, you did it too. We look to justify things. Rather than look at how we should be, we look at how we think that means we should be allowed to be. Which is fine. And I will ask you, do you think Elon Musk lives that way? Do you think Jack Dorsey from Twitter lives that way? Do you think Bill Gates lives that way? Do you think Steve Jobs lives that way? All these people who we say that we admire because of what they've accomplished. I mean, fuck it. Do you think Pablo Escobar lived that way? Do you think El Chapo lived that way? Of course not. These are people who had to be incredibly conscientious in developing what they've developed. They had to be incredibly careful in doing what they did. Of course, taking risks, calculated risks. But no one who's successful in these things is what they're allowed to be. They are what they should be, in their heads anyway. Develop it. But you can't be that when you surround yourself with too many influences. You should have some, but given the fact that you should only have some, make sure that they're the proper ones, the right ones, that lead you on the correct path. I'm not saying the good path, because who the hell knows what that is, but the best possible path that we can discern. Not the one that we want to be on, but the one that we need to be on. Questions, comments, concerns, complaints, criticism? Someone told me yesterday he looks like shit. You would too if you're 2,000 years old.